Hello everyone, welcome to our monthly Meetoo webinar. We're going to make a start. So many of you will be familiar with myself, Amy and Dermott here. Whether it be through email conversations, possibly our live Jumpstarter training or past webinar attendance. But for those of you that haven't as yet met us, we both work for the customer success team here at Meetoo. This month we'll be taking a look at a number of different areas of questioning, from icebreakers to evaluations, where we'll talk through the reasons to use them, the benefits, advice on how best to use them, and some examples of each. Throughout this webinar we'll be drawing from knowledge shared in conversations and meetings we've had with our customers, who themselves come from a variety of environments such as lecturing, teaching, facilitating technology, training, business and events. The benefits and advice shared today stand true for all environments. So even if the examples draw from, say, an educational setting, it can be applied across to the workplace and vice versa. Before we get started, I just want to remind you of the Meetoo session that we'll be running alongside the webinar today. So if you haven't already, please do join, either download the app searching for Meetoo, or join via the web app by just searching for web.meetoo.io on any internet connected device, and then enter the meeting code 128616733. And we will also have the web link joining instructions at the bottom of every slide, so they'll be there ready for you to join. So let's take a quick look at today's webinar agenda. So we'll be looking at 5 areas of questioning. Firstly, icebreakers, looking at how to start your session effectively. Secondly, establishing a baseline to allow comparison and progress in your session. Thirdly, questions assisting in checking understanding. Fourthly, how to improve retention of information shared. And lastly, evaluation questions. We'll then summarise, jump into Q&A, and finally we'll be asking for a bit of feedback on today's webinar. So I'm now going to pass you over to Dermott, who's going to get us started on today's agenda.
Thanks very much, Amy, and morning to everybody there. Okay, so we're looking at icebreakers first of all. And as you'd expect, we want to kick off with an icebreaker. So hopefully you've all got your Meetoo apps ready there. If you haven't, as Amy mentioned, go to web.meetoo.io and then enter the meeting ID, and you can see we've got that in the bottom right-hand corner of all the slides. So just a quick icebreaker here. Which of the following best describes your role? So are you a lecturer or teacher, learning technologist? Are you from an internal comms background, professional development or training in the workplace, of course, from meetings and events, or is there something that we've missed off here? And if there is something that we've missed off, once we close off the vote, if you could just drop that into the discussion board for us, that'd be really useful for us to know afterwards. So give you a couple more seconds on that question. We can see we've got quite a few of you on Meetoo, not so many responses. But if we're not going to get too many more, I shall take the vote there. Okay. Excellent. So a good spread across there, but by far and away, we've got more lecturers and teachers. So that's great to have all you guys from the educational institutions here, and a lot of meetings and events as well. Brilliant, and quite a few others as well. So yes, as I said, please do drop that into the discussion board after we close off the vote. But thank you for that. Okay, so icebreakers. Well, far from being just a bit of fun, icebreaker questions play a key role of any class, meeting, training session or conference, and particularly when you're using any kind of technology. So one thing they do is they can help you set the tone for the session. So this might be through a topical question that makes everybody sit up and get their game face on from the very beginning. This is really useful if your participants are expected to work hard during the session. They can efficiently show you who is attending, so via a demographic type question, and that might be geographic, departmental, or perhaps something a bit more personal. These are really helpful when your participants don't know each other, so a little bit like what we did just now. Your icebreakers can be a really crucial tool in getting your class or participants to know you and their fellow colleagues or students. Now, this is a very important stage at the start of any session or meeting where you want these participants to interact positively. Now, people will really enjoy and engage far better in your session if they're comfortable with you and the others around them, and it's often a key to creating a successful meeting or class. They can also serve as a get ready or temperature check. So are your participants ready to get going? And that's not so much to give an opportunity to delay the start, but certainly for you to then kick the session off properly. And an important byproduct of icebreakers is, no matter their format, is that they actually introduce the interactive or engagement technology that you might be using. That could be an app or keypads in a really practical way to make sure that your participants are really comfortable actually using it. So that means that when you get to the nitty-gritty and the real content and questions that you're going to be asking, you don't need to worry whether people are going to be able to respond or engage. But whatever icebreakers that you do choose to use, make sure that they've got a clear purpose. Many people do like to start off with a fun or a silly question as part of their icebreakers, and while it can be great to kick off with a laugh from your attendees, just make sure that you consider whether that is appropriate and it's in keeping with the tone of your session. Personally, my advice would always be to never ask a question that doesn't benefit either you or your participants, or indeed ones that do set that wrong tone for your session. And as we talked about demographics, you could take the opportunity to capture some really useful data in that icebreaker. Ultimately, though, I think that icebreakers, really should be a question that your participants cannot get wrong. And if you do go for a fun element, try to make sure that you can't embarrass anybody with any of the responses. I guess when it comes to examples, some of the ones that we actually see being used quite a lot are things like, how are you feeling this morning? What country or region are you from? What department do you work in? And then from a more educational slant, what level of study have you had in this subject or course prior to this? Although that's not necessarily just for educational setting, but also what's your main motivation for joining the session or course? So, really good to get expectations right from the off. We've actually got a slide deck that's available for download on our website. For those of you that are interested, Amy's about to post it out into the Meetoo board, so you can see it in the feed there to download it. Okay, then moving on to establishing a baseline. Now, in order to prove that a session has been a success, you're going to need to measure something, which means that you're going to need to capture some baseline data to start with. Now, baseline questions, they are often incorporated into an icebreaker session. However, I think it's really important to make the distinction between the two. And as I said a moment ago, your icebreakers should be a question that's easy for people to answer and that they can't get wrong. But that's definitely not the case necessarily for baseline questions. They can be used for a variety of purposes depending on the type of session that you're running. You might be looking to establish and record how much your attendees know about a subject at the beginning of a class or training session or a course even. And if you haven't done so already, you could also take the opportunity, as I mentioned, for a temperature check to see how people are feeling about the session, and then you can obviously take that check again throughout your session or course. They might also be opinion-based questions, where you want to actually capture what your participants think or feel about a subject prior to a presentation, panel session or Q&A, and then of course you can always ask that again afterwards to see the shift. I think it's really important to consider your response options or scales, really carefully when you're talking about baseline and capturing that data. So, really think about what you want or you need. It's definitely a good idea to decide on the outputs and what they should look like, and then actually formulate the questions and the response options accordingly to achieve them. Now, there are various methodologies when it comes to questions and scales for this kind of thing. Probably the most familiar will be Likert scales, and they're commonly used in research. Well-designed Likert options or responses, they exhibit both symmetry and balance. So that means that they contain equal numbers of positive and negative positions. Most commonly, people will use a 5-option scale, but of course you can use 7 or 9 as well. I think it's important to remember, though, that as reliable as they are, it is important to note that these scales can be subject to distortion from a few different causes. So that might be respondents' eagerness to please. They might have an avoidance of the extreme responses. or even they might be answering with an attempt to actually portray themselves or the organisation they're answering the questions on to portray them in a particular light, so be careful there. So yeah, equally as important as the responses to those scales is actually the language of the question. That really needs some considerable thought into how you're going to structure them in order to avoid some of those issues. The importance of capturing a baseline is that you can then afterwards check the understanding, later measure a retention, and then thus prove a success of your session, your meeting, class or training session, whatever you're running. Baseline questions are going to be specific to your session possibly, but two that we see quite commonly used are how much do you know about XYZ subject, or how confident do you feel about a topic that you're about to discuss. Okay, so that's all from me on baselines, and I'd like to hand back over to Amy to talk about checking understanding.
So assessing understanding is a complex task, and the challenge of assessing is figuring out what a learner knows and where he or she wants to go next. A learner could be anyone that's participating in a session, so it could be a meeting, training session or lecture, and really it's just someone that should know more about a subject after joining. So we've seen a shift in training and educational settings over the years from teaching to learning. So moving away from the scenario of a teacher or trainer at the front of the class imparting their knowledge, shifting towards forms of learning such as active and flipped learning, which strive to make teaching more interactive and dynamic. So this is where we see interactive and engagement tools becoming an important part of the teacher, trainer and presenter toolkit. It's important to vary your methods when checking and improving understanding, and this is closely linked with retention, which we'll cover later. A good start is engaging your participants in both discussion and questioning to assist with the teacher or presenter in judging levels of understanding, to allow them to move on or go on to the next, or repeat the topic, or go into more detail about a particular aspect. One way is using interactive tools to ask single or multiple choice questions to assess your learners and allow you also to gain a better understanding of the knowledge and opinion in the room. This can help direct the content of your session and make it more productive. People choose to assess their learners or participants in different ways, and the best way often depends on your style, the time you have available and the type of content you're covering. But my preferred method that I hear of people using the most is asking a key question about content covered to test the knowledge, either after each section or as a set of questions towards the end of the session, but also giving yourself some time to go over any gaps in knowledge that you identify. To test understanding, there are a number of different formats. I've already mentioned a few, but to mention some of the less obvious question formats, we have ordering, which allows you to evaluate students' ability to put them in, or items in sequential order. A short essay-style question, assessing a person's ability to reason, create, analyse, synthesise, and evaluate material. And also matching, which allows you to assess your students' ability to identify pairs. For instance, a pair could be something like active learning and a student-led, which is an example of a pair. If you want to measure if learning has taken place or if opinion has been swayed, the format of single or multiple choice question does work well, and it's an easy way to identify change. So in your baseline of questions, you can have something that you can ask at the start of the session and then ask again at the end of the session. And this will check if there has been understanding of your content and prove success. So we're now going to look at retention, and we're going to start with a famous quote from Benjamin Franklin, although some people debate whether this was his quote, but either way it stands true. Tell me and I forget, teach me and I remember, involve me and I learn. And this nicely leads on to how we can transform our meetings and classes to involve people, improve retention and help them learn more effectively. Let's first run a quick poll. So what percentage of information is retained when a session uses purely direct instruction or lecturing? So is it 5%, 10%, 35%, 50% or 70%? And if you have joined late, the web link is at the bottom of the screen, so web.meetoo.io. Type that into your browser and the meeting code is there in the corner of the screen. So we've got a number of responses in. I think we'll probably close it there and have a look. Right, so we've got the vast majority saying 10%, which is interesting, and let's take a look at what the actual answer is. It's 5%. So sorry, no one got that one right. But this statistic comes directly from the Learning Pyramid, which is researched and created by the National Training Laboratories, which illustrates the percentage of learner recall that is associated with various approaches. Everything from the passive extreme of recalling 5% of a lecture to participatory methods, which we can see recall increasing to 50% and over. Participatory, oh dear, that's a difficult word. Participatory methods involve people using, implementing or relaying information. They are likely to instantly make mistakes and then have to learn how to correct their mistakes. This forces their brain to concentrate and information is retained. Tasks such as reading, where we retain about 10% of information, don't allow us to make mistakes and practice what we've just read. With 50% of information being retained when conducting group discussion, this is a good place to start in making our sessions more active and a relatively simple method to plan and conduct. A phrase we often hear is practice makes perfect. With people retaining 75% of what they learn when they practice by doing, it's an important approach to build into sessions. It isn't always easy to accomplish in a classroom or meeting room, but a simple method can be testing their knowledge through quick assessment. Displaying a correct answer within your assessment can also improve retention and engagement for the participants. But it's also important to monitor the knowledge gaps and where they lie and help you effectively teach. Alternative methods to improve retention could be asking a one-word answer question, displaying a word cloud, which helps you draw out people's knowledge, creating an engaging display that you can then reflect on during your session. I'm just going to share an example with you now, a practical example of group discussion. You can display a scenario or a question in your presentation related to your content, get your participants discussing in groups. You can collect feedback through whiteboards, post-its, flip charts, but obviously we recommend apps. But this apps also does allow you to collect a digital record of the responses, and importantly allows you to display the results on screen so you can further discuss the feedback that you've captured, but also correct any misconceptions, reinforcing further the new information. So this here is an example that we shared in past webinars, so some of you may have seen it, and it is from an educational setting where discussion was used successfully. All of the 200 students that attended this class actively participated in the discussion, sharing their individual ideas, making the lecture very memorable. So I'm now going to pass you back over to Dermott, who's very keen to get on to the final section of evaluation.
Thanks very much, Amy. Just before I do, this is obviously a fairly specific educational situation here, but I think, based on, we saw quite a few people from the meetings and events industry here, I think for the most part when people attend an event or a conference, they're often going there to learn something or there's some information being imparted. So, these methodologies and examples could be really useful to event organisers as well to actually, guide their customers into having the type of event where people go away having learned something. So I think that's really good. Okay, so moving on to evaluations then. I don't really think that there's any need to explain why one would want to ask evaluation questions. However, it is certainly always worth discussing what makes a good evaluation session. As over the years, we've witnessed some that I think if they were actually evaluated themselves would probably get pretty low scores. I think you need to start by accepting that people really don't often feel very motivated to provide feedback or fill in evaluation forms for you. And this can be for a variety of reasons, from apathy to a fear of retribution or recrimination as a result of their feedback. So, from our experience, some of the recommendations we're about to go through now, can really help you create an optimal environment and dynamic for evaluation sessions. So, first of all, remove all the fear. So, this comes down to setting clear expectations. How is the session going to work? The type of questions you're going to be asking. Are you going to be sharing those responses live? Will you be sharing the responses afterwards? And of course, will you be identifying those responses? You need to weigh up the side of identification. We often find that anonymity is key to getting the best feedback from people in these evaluation sessions particularly. Don't forget that works from both sides, of course. So, the speakers or organisers, they're really open to constructive feedback, but generally they're not up for public shaming. So you might want to think about hiding the data, hiding that results as you get it in, or looking to use some sort of moderation for qualitative responses. Then we want to look at honesty. So, as part of this setting of the ground rules, be honest with people. So you really value this feedback. We always try to do that before our evaluation sessions. Tell them that the feedback really means something and it's actually going to be used. Better still, prove it by sharing some learnings that you've had from previous feedback sessions and changes that you might have made as a result of people's feedback. That I think is really important, because for the most part people are generally quite nice, I think, and they might be disinclined to give you negative feedback if they think the person asking the question might be embarrassed as part of those evaluations, or indeed it could root back to them. So putting people at ease is a really key thing. One of the things for me, a particular bugbear, is people not avoiding unnecessary questions, asking loads and loads of questions as part of their evaluation. You really don't want people questioning why they're answering a certain question. That's basically, the fact is any additional questions that you add into it is going to add time and testing people's patience, which of course is going to increase the drop-off rate in responses part of that session. KISS, so everybody's, I'm sure, familiar with the usual acronym for KISS, but this is a little twist on it, and it's actually keep it short, stupid. You've got a limited amount of time, as I just mentioned, so make it count. Keep it as short as possible, whilst obviously capturing the information that you do want to get. And then the Whiffen principle. This is what's in it for me. There are lots of different ways to incentivise people to actually give you their feedback. It really depends on who your participants are. In a lot of cases, actually just sharing how that feedback is going to be used and those participants knowing that their opinion actually counts and is going to make a difference can be a really powerful driver. There are lots and lots of different evaluation questions that you can use, and we're going to be asking our own at the end of this session. But a few that we actually see get used quite regularly are: to what extent do you feel that you actively contributed during the session? How satisfied were you with the organisation of the session or meeting or event? And then actually people quite often will be looking to get some further feedback on the session overall and potentially looking to use some more qualitative capture. So asking people about things that we shouldn't do, things that we should start doing, or things that we should continue or do more of. So there's just a couple of examples there. Okay, I think we're getting close on time here, so I think it's time that we move into a bit of a Q&A session. If there are any questions out there, we'll have a look through the messaging board here. I can see there's one from Bob Morris. It's a good question. How do meeting organisers send out info like your PowerPoint? Is it the same for app users and browser users? So I guess that's looking at our PowerPoint guide here, and I think Mick's very helpfully answered that question for us there. Yes, you can use a host message as Amy did, and whether your participants are on the native app or the web app, they will get the link there and they can go straight to downloading. With our app, you can't actually drop files into it, but of course, as you can see with those web links, you can just host them online somewhere and link to it.
And even as a participant, you can post a web link. You don't have to be, you don't have to do it through the host messaging. So you yourselves could post a web link in here and share that with the other attendees.
Great point. Is there anything else? Just in the interest of time, I think we should potentially move on, Amy, if you're up for that. If any more questions do come in, we'll look to answer them, or we will answer them after the session.
I think next we just wanted to make you aware of some webinars that we have coming up. We've got a very exciting webinar, largely as it's not hosted by us, it's hosted by some of our fellow or customers in education. So the next webinar is being run by two lecturers from the University of Southampton, and they'll be sharing their innovative use of in-class polling to facilitate forum theatre sessions within their health sciences students. It will be Trevor Kettle and James Wilson who'll be sharing their experiences with us and their use of Meetoo's live polling for branching storylines to explore issues around challenging topics such as mental health. They'll also be providing some observations and outcomes of using messaging in class and the challenge of getting around inappropriate and unmannerly comments. Plus, they'll also be sharing some more information on a recent case study we published on our website, looking at how they used Skype in conjunction with Meetoo. So the details of that are on the screen now, and you can join that on the 12th of September. So hopefully see you there.
I just want to jump to a question before we move to evaluation.
Sure.
Sorry to interrupt, Amy. Bob's asked another good question here. Can I keep meeting open to allow participants to answer after the formal session ends? So you can leave your meeting open as long as you like, and people can obviously post messages as you guys are now. Actually, we've got a feature coming very soon to Meetoo in the next month or so, which will allow you to have self-paced questions and more survey-style questions as well. So actually, you'll be able to get people to answer questions in their own time before and or after the session as well, and then do the live polling during your meeting. Tom's got a question. Are there a maximum number of questions you should ask in one session? Well, that's I guess it's a tricky question to answer. I mean, we asked one question to start, so a 20-minute session. We asked 2 questions, and we've got an evaluation coming up as well. It really depends what you're trying to do. I guess if you're looking to capture lots of data or spark discussion, then you might want to use a few more, but you don't really want to overwhelm people, I don't think.
Yeah, and I think if you're using assessment or feedback, you might be asking a few more questions. They could be more weighted to the end. It's nice having ones in the middle and at the beginning. So it's just hitting the right balance. And as you said, it does depend on your content, but I think you need to be careful not to ask too many. But yeah.
Cool. Juan Lewis, I'd like to try it my own by asking check matching option. Hopefully that's just telling us you're going to give it a go. So that's great to hear. William, yes, we do email out invitations like you got for this one. So you should get one, but we will make sure that you're on the list in case you're not already.
And just on that, so there will be invitations going out for this one just to the education customers. But if you are not from the education sector and you'd like to join this webinar, then you can go to our website. The link is on the screen now, and you can join through there, and also from there you can join any of our other training sessions such as Jumpstarter, and our future webinars are advertised on that page as well.
Sure. And one from Dunya here. Yeah, we'll be sending out the recording. So as you've registered and you've obviously attended a bit, we will be sending out the recording of this session to you. Okay, we're well over time now. Apologies for that, but in keeping with part of our session today, we'd really appreciate it if you could share your feedback on this webinar. We are going to be sparing our blushes on this one, I think, Amy, aren't we? So if you just let us know what you think of this webinar. Was it a total waste of your time all the way up to extremely valuable, or a 3 there if it was average or in the middle? That'd be great. We'll also be, leaving the discussion board or Q&A board open afterwards, and you can put some feedback on that as well. So I'm just going to close that poll, and then we're going to spare our blushes there. So, as we said, please let us know how we can improve these sessions. Please put some stuff on the board there. And then, Amy, could you just talk through that while I post this out?
Yep, so we would obviously like to welcome any Trustpilot reviews. If you just go to Trustpilot and search for Meetoo, you'll be able to give us a review. And also, our YouTube channel has some really great resources, not just our webinar recordings, but training material and tips. So please do subscribe to our YouTube channel as well. I think Dermott will be sending the links out. There you go, you've got them now. So, yeah, I think that's it from us.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks very much, and we hope to see you on the next session.
Yeah. Thanks, bye.